Colin Kaepernick, I think, has done what he intended. He opened up a debate on race. And it's a fantastic and wonderful thing that there is now, for better or worse, a new, sincere discussion on the matter. And I know there are plenty of people who will try to shift focus off of race and talk about respect for the flag or talk about respect for the song, but to me, the discussion on race is so easy to turn away from that a grand gesture was necessary. And again, I feel as if this has worked. The big thing I'm hearing a lot of with this discussion is the most important question now that we kind of have to talk about. And that is,
what's next, though? We hear about, the attention to this issue, and I sit back and I say, I'm listening. I've heard you. What do we do next, though, in application of the issue?
Let's come to the table with some solutions.
Yep. How do we solve it?
What do we do about it? What actions do we take? Something I can see in many people is sympathy and empathy, but that's only a start. And it's incredibly important to be sympathetic to the problem, but it's not a fix. So what do we do? That's a simple statement with a highly complex and challenging and kind of a layered answer. But I do believe the simple answer is we fix our biases. And I've got some ideas how. This video is the first part. There will be more to follow. There is going to be quite a bit of discussion from me on this. I recently read a powerful article. The writer, Jon Greenberg, argued in favor of reducing the power of the word racist. And I'll put up a link to the article and additional link to a Harvard University website where you can test your racial bias. I'll put that in the description. But the argument can be summed up as this. The cultural taboo on the word racist prevents common, well-intending Americans from self-identifying their own bias, and therefore inhibits the possibility of addressing the bias before it's manifested into racist actions within the society. When the average person thinks about the word racist, the image is of the neo-Nazi, the KKK member, white sheets and cross-burning. The reality is that most of us carry bias. The problem with bias is that most bias, especially biases directed toward a racial group, is usually inaccurate. It's not based in much of the way of fact. To illustrate this, let's do an exercise. I want you to close your eyes and imagine two women. The first is pregnant and seeking an abortion. Think of this woman in vivid detail. Imagine her circumstances, her family, her lifestyle. Now think of the second woman, an unwed mother, and do the same thing here. Think of her family, her lifestyle. Consider this fact. Nearly 60% of women seeking an abortion are unwed and already have a child. So was your first image, woman seeking an abortion, did that match the image you had in your mind of the unwed mother? More than likely it wasn't. Most likely, your image of what the average unwed mother is probably relatively inaccurate as well. The problem is that we make important decisions based off these inaccuracies. Abortion legislation is debated with the first woman in mind and not the second. And maybe opinions on abortion would not be the same, and maybe they would be the same regardless of the bias, but maybe some laws wouldn't exist if bias didn't drive the decisions that lead to their passing. Most laws in the United States prescribe punishments without bias, but are implemented and even suggested with a prejudiced intent. Consider these facts reported by and available on the CDC website. The highest demographic of drug overdose deaths by an overwhelming margin occur in white males aged 45 to 54. Basically, they'll be white middle-aged males. U.S. Department of Health and Human Services reported the rate of illicit drug use in the United States is nearly identical between black and white communities. And yet nearly 40% of drug arrests are black males. This is a huge racial disparity, and it suggests an unbiased law that prescribes punishment to those who possess drugs without prejudice is being enforced by those we trust to do so with prejudice. And therefore, the demographic most inclined to be using and even dying from drugs is the least likely to be challenged by drug enforcement initiatives. Take New York City for another example. They operated under a policy rooted in the broken window theory, which in a nutshell is that smaller crimes lead to bigger ones. New York City put this ideology into practice by implementing a no tolerance policy for minor offenses, graffiti, squatting, vandalism, in order to prevent crimes like murder. This led to policies like stop and frisk, again, being implemented in minority communities almost exclusively. Stop and frisk, by the way, is the New York statute that allowed police officers to stop and search citizens without a warrant on the basis of probable cause. If there was a suspicion that you were carrying a weapon or drugs, police officers were within their rights to execute a search. Stop and frisk in practice targeted blacks and Hispanics 84% of the time, despite the New York City Police Department's own data, which showed an overwhelmingly higher rate of drug and weapon possession among the very few whites targeted for stop and frisk. You can also look at the facts about drug addiction, which suggest higher rates of drugs in white community. If the broken window theory holds water, and stop and frisk sought to find drugs and contraband, then the primary target should have been white males, especially when the national data on gun ownership show that the same middle-aged white male is more likely, overwhelmingly so, to be a gun owner and to seek gun ownership. In practice, the people New York City police should have been stopping were white males walking into high-rise corporate office buildings. But would New York lawmakers even consider a law if that was the target? My point here is that while this nation's laws aren't necessarily biased, its lawmakers and its law enforcement officers, they are. We as a nation concede facts and evidence to bias to devastating results to minorities and are consciously oblivious to it due to the inability for racist and good person to coexist in our collective psyche. And maybe we should consider a change. I'm going to stop here in the interest of time. And I realize this video has presented a problem without the solution I promised. However, in subsequent videos, I will give some ideas for practical solutions. Though maybe a simple one here is just for us as citizens to challenge ourselves to an honest assessment when we consider others in our daily lives, and more importantly, pressure lawmakers to consider laws more objectively. Let me know what you guys think about this in your comments below, and please be sure to like and subscribe.